click on that and it'll bring up a drop-down menu with the event you've already set up. And then that should work.
Oh God, we are live.
We are live.
It did not do that for me.
Okay, we're live on the Hub channels. So, did you schedule the stream?
I did.
Okay, well, it should be. Let me just...
Yeah, because it even pulled up on the YouTube thing. Hold on 1 second. I don't know.
Hey everyone. Welcome to the Nerdsync Real Origin stream. In pure Nerdsync fashion, we are sorting it out right now.
Every single time I go live on anything, it doesn't work.
It's, yeah, it just says waiting for Nerdsync.
I set it up, I scheduled it, and I don't get anything. It just doesn't work. I click on, I don't know what to do, guys. I'm sorry. And now I have so many people in my own thing, in my own YouTube channel that are like, where is it?
Yeah, so if you click the schedule button,
I did.
Or just Stevie, just click the go live button. See
I did that too, and it's just telling me to create a new one.
Well, worst case scenario, just create a new stream then.
Okay. I'm just a little frustrated. I'm sorry, everyone.
It's okay. Welcome, everyone, to the Nerdsync Real Origins. I am Owen, not the host of Nerdsync, despite what you might be led to believe.
I think I got it. Hold on, I'm working on it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
All right. Sorry, everyone. Welcome to
the
Nerdsync Real Origins live stream. I'm so sorry that I'm really bad at technical things live streaming. Every single time it goes wrong. So let's go around and just do a little what's going is it working?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Sorry, that was my phone. I was just checking the mainstream's working.
Okie dokie. Well,
okay,
we're here.
We are live on my end.
I think we're live on my end.
We're live on my end.
All right, fantastic. If we're not
live
on my
end, we are live on Nerdsync.
Fantastic. All right, one more time, reel it back. Here we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Nerdsync Real Origins panel for the at-home Comic-Con. I am Scott, host of the channel Nerdsync, and we've got a couple great guests also here right now. Owen, introduce yourself, please.
Hello, I'm Owen, and the internet may lead you to believe that I'm a fan of comic books. Am I? Let's find out.
Scholars remain divided. And then we also have Michaela. Introduce yourself, please.
I am Michaela J. Laird. I am said scholar, and I deny that he ever liked comics.
Oh,
it's debatable. It's debatable.
There's a rift. There's a rift already. And we're also supposed to have another person here who may or may not jump in at some point. But we will see. I've been abandoned by my only other American panelist, so I am outnumbered
officially
right now.
reclaimed the territories with this victory.
He has been left to die at the hands of the Brits.
That's right.
But, never mind the Revolutionary War. Let's talk about some revolutionary comics, Scott.
Oh, what a good segue. So, if you're not familiar with the whole Real Origins concept, the idea behind it is there's a lot of fun, crazy origins of superheroes and supervillains in comics themselves, but the real origins happen outside of the page, where you get the circumstances in culture or creativity that lead to creating these iconic characters and villains. And it's a very fun thing to dive into the real world history about how some of our favorite comic books and characters were created. And just to give you a little taste, a little teaser of what that looks like, I would like to tell you guys the real origin of the Red Skull. Have either of you heard of this before? The real origin of the Red Skull?
I haven't, and the only glimpse I've seen is from the thumbnail of your stream, so I'm quite excited. But just before we talk about the real origin of the Red Skull,
yes.
Let's just explain that this is part of At Home Comic Con, the huge, weird digital fundraising event that myself, Matt Drake, and all of you wonderful people have helped put together. We are raising money from Hope from Home and 3 incredible charities, the United Nations Foundation, Red Nose Day, and the United Way, who are all doing the bit to aid and give people aid and relief who are struggling with the global pandemic. So us wonderful nerds are trying to do our part and make things a little better. So in the description of all of these streams, wherever you may be watching it, there will be a link to a Tiltify page, which is where you can go and donate, and all of the proceeds that we raise today will go straight to those incredible charities. We will also be donating off some awesome gifts, which Scott is going to tell you about right now.
Yes.
So if you, at the end of this stream, we will announce either live or in the live chat who's won. But Scott, what's on the line today? What are people
What's on the line, Owen? So this is a panel pretty much about learning and encouraging people to look into history and to discover some fun stories. So we figured two cool giveaways, two cool prizes that we would like to give to some lucky people are going to be I believe $50 Amazon gift cards. An Amazon gift card. Is it $30? Okay. It's an Amazon gift card. And then also, so you can buy books and all that. But if you are a person who likes to read or likes to soak in information audibly, well, we also have another thing, which is a 3-month subscription to Audible for some audiobooks, which are also very handy. There's a lot of cool information there that you can learn through audiobooks, which is very nice. And yeah, all the links to everything will be in the descriptions everywhere.
So
Thank you
at the end of this panel, we will be announcing who's won those wonderful gifts. So if you want to be in with a chance with it, just donate any amount of money to the Tiltfile link in the description, and I'm sure our wonderful moderators will be putting it in the live chat feeds as well. So yeah. So should we get on with the panel, Scott? Should we talk about Should we talk about a certain red skull dugger?
A red skull, perhaps. Okay, so I want to take you guys back a little bit. This is a very short one to kind of tease the broader information that we'll be doing in this panel. It's very fun. History is very exciting and fun and wacky, and I want to demonstrate this with this little story here. So, as I'm sure you know, the creators of Captain America and Red Skull were Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. Mm-hmm. And Jack Kirby had a kind of a habit of eating. Like, whenever he would go out to lunch with Joe Simon and just talk business, talk shop, he would always have the habit of ordering the most junk food items on the menu. He was always like, because Joe Simon was paying. So, like, Jack Kirby was like, I'm not paying for any of this. I'm going to order all the ice cream, all the cakes, everything. And it was probably at one of those luncheons when they were trying to think up the idea for a menacing villain for the new hero, Captain America. And I have actually a quote here from Joe Simon, but it's a little lengthy, so I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. Basically, they were just looking around anywhere for inspiration. And on their table, probably because of Jack Kirby's junk food diet, was a giant ice cream sundae with a bright red cherry on top. It was a hot fudge sundae. All right? And so Joe Simon talked about how the fudge was dripping down the ice cream and it looked like arms and legs, and at the very top was this bright red cherry. And so they thought about making a villain for Captain America. The very first big iconic villain for Captain America was going to be called Hot Fudge. And it was just going to be a hot fudge man.
That is brilliant.
Yes. And obviously they were just joking back and forth, but they did like the idea of this bright red thing, this cherry that kind of looked like a human face. And they were like, that's interesting, though. So they took that concept and basically just said, he even has a quote here. He said, "Wow, I said to myself, Red Skull. Now that sounds good. And makes a lot more sense than hot fudge."
I mean, I'm just picturing like the 70+ years of Captain America history where he's fighting hot fudge.
Oh, I mean, imagine like Infinity War or Endgame where like they're going to get the Soul Stone and it's just this gloop of hot fudge.
Honestly, it's funny because obviously the Red Skull is such an iconic character and there's so much about him that parallels Steve Rogers so well. Mm-hmm. Where does Hot Fudge parallel? I know Steve's like a buff, well-cut guy. So is that the parallel? He's just like, his enemy is just pure sugar and carbs?
Yeah, oh yeah, he's just like gloopy and all over the place, like wavy. You know, like Steve Rogers is built and strong and then just get like this gelatinous hot fudge monster. Imagine the course of history if that had taken hold. Where would we be?
That's amazing. What do you think about that, Michaela?
I'm wondering how much different. What's the storyline with Hydra we had a couple years ago? I'm wondering how different that would be.
Secret Empire?
That's it, Secret Empire. I'm wondering how different that would be if, like, the plan revolves some old-timey malt shop or something.
Instead of like Hail Hydra.
Yeah.
What would the equivalent of Cap saying "Hail Hydra" at the start of that be? Would it be like,
Oh, I don't
Hail
even
hot
know.
fudge.
Hail hot
Like-
fudge.
Hail Fudge?
Hail fudge. Oh, boy.
Everyone get hashtag Hail Fudge going in the comments. I want to see that in the comments of the Tiltify donations that will be sent in throughout today's stream. I want to see hashtag Hail Fudge.
Hail fudge.
So
Hail
if you're
fudge.
okay with that, should I move on to my Captain America adjacent story?
Owen, I would like nothing more than if you did that.
You know what? That means a lot to me. So yeah, so I just wanted to share when Scott told me he wanted to tell the story about Red Skull and kind of the history behind that character, it got me thinking about the history of Captain America and all the evolutions that the character has gone through throughout his history, the ups and downs throughout the Golden Age, the Silver Age, and the age that has ran ever since the 80s.
The age, we know.
The
we know it.
The big age. But yeah, and so there's a particular story about Captain America's real world backstory that's always fascinated me. And it's one that not a lot of people seem to know about. And that's about the time that Captain America was almost bought by DC Comics. I don't know if either of you are familiar with this story.
I don't know this story very well. There's been a lot of fun, like almost purchases from either company, and I don't know this one.
So I've made some lovely bullet point notes. So I'm just going to read you my snappy soundbite notes.
Please
so
do.
Captain America was created by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby in March of 1941 for Timely Comics, the predecessor to Marvel, and he first appeared in Captain America Comics issue 1. Now, Cap was a hugely successful character during the war era, but the changing landscapes of the 1940s and the early 1950s kind of saw superheroes go on the decline. Comics stayed popular, but superhero comics were so closely associated with the war that, once the war had ended, people wanted romance and crime and Western books. They weren't really that into big dudes with spandex. So basically, to try and keep their sales steady, Marvel started tweaking a lot of the names of their books. And so in March of 1949, Captain America became Captain America's Weird Tales, and it became a book about werewolves and other fun stuff.
That's right, yeah.
Safe to say, that didn't last, because then the book got cancelled. Now, there were a couple of relaunches throughout the 50s where they tried to bring Cap back, and they've kind of been retconned out of continuity now. But what I want to get across is that basically, by the early 50s, Marvel, or as they were now known as Atlas Comics, kind of weren't doing too well financially. They were owned by Martin Goodman, who founded the company. And in 1951, he decided that the best way to boost Marvel's sales and kind of help them corner DC would be to essentially cut the middleman out and create their own distribution company. So they fired the distributor that they were currently working with, and they set up the Atlas News Company in 1951, which essentially would allow them to essentially flood the market with Marvel books and just drown out any other company. Now, this didn't work out. And
never does.
By 1956, the Atlas News Company had closed, and Marvel had no distributor, which is a pretty bleak thing.
You need that for your comics to
it's
go
one
out
thing
to
to
people.
make books. It's one thing to make books. It's another thing to get books out. So
how relevant?
Yeah, right.
I know, right? So basically, just to summarize, after the in-house distribution company closed, they signed a 5-year deal with a company known as the American News Corp. And 5 years, big distributor. Where's the problem? Less than a year later, that company folded. Just like that. They woke up one morning, we don't exist anymore. Your books aren't getting on shelves.
That's so scary.
And this is like 1957. So this is around the time where Marvel sales are kind of really at their lowest. As a result of losing the distributors, Martin Goodman essentially laid off all of their full-time staff except from Stan Lee. This was like the really dark period of Marvel history that, like, if you read anything about Marvel's history, you'll see all the interviews with Lee where he's talking about that period of time where he was writing really generic horror books and he was, questioning his future in the comic book world. This was that period. It was a really dark moment for Marvel. They had no distributor. The books weren't selling well to begin with, but now the people that were buying them couldn't get them. And they were seemingly weeks away from having to close down. Now, it's worth noting that the year before, in 1956, DC had really kicked off again with the Silver Age. They brought the Flash back, and they brought Green Lantern back, and they were really bringing back the superheroes, and they were selling really well. So as Marvel was still struggling, DC were, riding high.
Yeah, thriving.
So what DC did in 1958 was they reached out to Martin Goodman, who, seeing the financial state that Marvel were in, and offered to purchase a number of the characters that weren't being published anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The list is, it was the Human Torch, the original Android character, Namor the Submariner, and Captain America. Basically, none of these 3 characters were in publication, and DC said, we will pay you $15,000, which today is $126,000, which,
That's pretty good.
I mean, I wouldn't sell Captain America for $126,000.
No, for sure, knowing what he is now. But
America's ass.
Then, yeah, knowing that he is.
You can't put a price on America's ass, Scott.
You cannot do that.
So the heads at DC reached out to Martin Goodman and offered $15,000 for the rights of Cap, Namor, and the Human Torch. And you'd think that Martin Goodman would just flat out reject. He wouldn't even entertain the idea. But the scary part is, from the reading that I've looked at, he genuinely considered selling.
Oh yeah,
they were on the verge of licensing out these characters to DC.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, though, what choice did he have?
Well, that was it. It sounds crazy to say now, but you got to think about it. They tried to bring Cap and Namor and the Human Torch back in the early mid-50s. I think they tried to bring them back twice, and both times, I don't think those books lasted a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so, at this point, this is 4 or 5 years before things like the Fantastic Four would show up. Superheroes were not the priority at Marvel. They were just essentially just leftovers of an era that they put behind them. And so why not cash in and use that money to kind of keep the future of the company going? Now, fortunately, Goodman found his better judgment and rejected it. And the ironic part is they did sign a distribution deal with Independent News, who, if you don't know, is the sister company of DC Comics.
That's right.
So there was kind of a nice thing there, because obviously it was the deal with Independent News that essentially allowed Marvel to bring the superheroes back and give us things like the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, the Avengers. Cap came back in a big way because of this deal with DC.
Yeah.
So I always find it funny that DC play a big hand in the return of Captain America in the Silver Age.
Well, I believe too that they even had a deal with that publisher, where it was Marvel could only do a handful of comics. They could only
4 or 5 titles.
Yeah, 4 or 5, and because they knew it was owned by DC, they didn't want to think that they didn't want to purposely put a lot of superhero stuff out.
Yeah, so that's why you got when the Fantastic Four debuted.
Yeah,
it's drawn like a horror comic. They're in civilian clothes. They essentially snuck in a superhero book in the back door.
That's right.
What I find really fascinating about that story is it kind of runs parallel with what happened with Captain Marvel / Shazam, and how that character was taken out of publication in the 50s, purchased by DC, and then brought into that universe. And today, you kind of just view Shazam as a DC character.
Mm-hmm.
He's been a core part of that universe since the 70s now. That he just kind of naturally fits as a DC hero. So it's crazy to think, it almost could have been Captain America in that position. And just, not only how that would affect the DC landscape if you've got Captain America in the Justice League, but how much that would have affected Marvel. Would we have got the big Marvel comeback in the 60s if they'd sold the last Titan superhero off to their rivals? I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think it's really interesting what you're saying, especially with the comparison to Shazam, just because you're right, it is a character that I think a lot of people, including myself, would just be like, yeah, that's a DC character. Yeah. Because he's been with DC for so long.
At this point, Shazam's probably been at DC longer than he was at Fawcett.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I think that's interesting to think that we could have had a world where we think about Steve Rogers that same way, because it just sounds wrong to me to say Captain America, the DC character.
How can Captain America, how can Cap and Superman live in the same world? It's like they're occupying the same space.
Exactly. They would. Do you think that they would have tried to make Captain America as big as a player as Batman and Superman? Or
it's funny because I don't think they would, because like Shazam's still a fairly big character, but he's never been forefront of the DC universe.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of just been one of the better background characters. Like he's been a member of the Justice League. He's for the most part, he's always had his own books that have sold relatively well.
Mm-hmm.
But there haven't been many events that are centered around Shazam, are there?
No, I mean, even in the New 52, they tried to push him like hell, but he still never got his own book. Every issue that was centered around him was a backup story.
Yeah, that's it. And it's like I wouldn't say that DC doesn't care for Shazam, because they've always tried to have him in some form of prominent position, and they've always had really interesting writers do things with that character to really bring him into the DC universe.
Mm-hmm.
But he's nowhere near the likes of the Trinity or like the usual Justice Leaguers. So it's kind of, and obviously we think now that obviously they couldn't treat Cap like that because he's Captain America, but this time, Captain Marvel at one point was the most popular superhero in the world.
Mm-hmm.
He was outselling Superman, which is one of the reasons why Fawcett got forced out of publication. And so if that was how they treated Captain Marvel, who was this massive character, and you got Captain America, who fell out of publication not because of any legal issues, just because people weren't interested in him anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
They probably just want to. Yeah, they could either take it one way or the other, like sweep him totally under the rug, like we have this character just in case, but whatever. Or they could like really try to reinvent him because he was so out of favor.
I just don't know what you're thinking about that time where they bring the character in. I just don't know what they do with him.
I don't know either. That's a tough one. Well, I mean, I'm glad that we've got what we have now.
Oh yeah,
it just feels right. Yeah.
But like, we could have got Chris Evans in Batman v Superman v Captain America.
There's a fan edit out there. I'm sure of it. Of it.
Someone has done it at some point.
Oh, I'm sure of it. But then it's also things like, say for example, Marvel did have the kind of renaissance in the 60s without Cap.
Mm-hmm.
Cap's such a big cornerstone of the Marvel universe. He's almost like the senior statesman of all of the heroes. Who'd kind of take up that position?
I don't know.
Probably Iron Man.
But but still, like, Iron Man was only created in the 60s. I think the reason why Cap's such like a focal point of that universe is that he was there before everyone else. So would Namor be like?
I mean, because almost everything is tied back to Captain America in some way.
There's so much of the Marvel universe which links back to like the Super Soldier program as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
like
absolutely.
that's such a big way that they kind of wrap other parts of the universe in.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of lose that. Like, what would that mean for characters like in Cap books? Like, would the Red Skull now be a DC villain?
Sorry, you mean Hot Fudge?
Would Hot Fudge be a DC villain?
Yeah, maybe.
Hot Fudge and the
property.
Condiment King.
Yeah. Oh, imagine them teaming up together.
I'd love that. But yeah, it just fascinates me.
That is fascinating. I like that. I like glimpses into alternate worlds, although that one seems particularly like a lesser version of our world,
Yeah, it's just strange.
It's just very strange. That's good. That's interesting. I don't know good segues, everyone, but I would really love to hear what you, Michaela, have brought to the table.
Well, speaking of DC,
thank you.
Segue.
That's a good segue. Thank you.
Today happens to also be Superman and Lois Lane's 82nd anniversary.
And you know what? They're looking great for it.
They're doing
I know. But here's a question. You guys know the origins behind Lois Lane?
Yes.
I know Scott sort of does.
So when Sam Lane and Lois Lane's mother got married,
the real
only
world
after
origins.
they got married.
The real one, or Owen, come on.
And they loved each other very, very much.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Oh, and this is for the panel late at night.
Yeah, you're doing the late night panel.
If you watch the opening panel, you would have seen that nothing is off limits.
Oh, I saw the opening panel, and I need to smack Drake for that terrible British accent.
Yeah, we'll have words. But yeah, sorry. Tell us about Lois Lane.
Please,
so
enlighten us.
There has been quite a few people who have been through history perceived to maybe be the inspiration for Lois Lane. So there was someone, Jerry Siegel knew when he was working at a newspaper at one of his old schools. There were actresses who both of them were fans of. But the actual real-world inspiration for Lois Lane was a young model, Joe Shuster, hired. And Joe Shuster was still a teenager at the time, and he put out this ad in a newspaper called just asking for a model for life drawing. But he signed it like his full name, Joshua or Joseph Schuster. So they expected a much older artist when the model came, and no, it's just a teenage kid. And through the, I know, keeping this wholesome, guys.
Yeah.
Through talking and just doing all this modeling work, they got to become friends. The only problem was that Joe Shuster was very much falling in love with her.
As you
It's kind of sweet. Yeah, it's kind of sweet because they spoke a lot, and Jerry Siegel was actually the model for Clark Kent, so he was in the room a lot, and they all got to talking. There was a nice little threesome talking, and they end up being the creators of this amazing thing. Anyway, the model, her name was Joanne. She did have another name before eventually changing it to Joanne, but Joanne Carter is what she came to be known as. She eventually had to move away, but did promise to keep talking to Joe. And they did. They wrote letters backwards and forwards. Cut to 1948. While Joe was in love with Joanne, Joanne got a very massive crush on Jerry Siegel and eventually became Joanne Siegel.
What?
Oh no! Oh, the tragedy, the heartbreak.
So if we could use analogies, being Jerry Siegel is very much the model for Clark Kent. She was the model for Lois Lane. They ended up together, but the artist never got what he loved. Which is a shame because the marriages of Jerry Siegel are a nightmare, especially his first marriage. But it's always like a weird thing to think of what if Joe and Joanne had ended up together. That would have been really sweet, but
That's like heartbreaking stuff.
It's a heartbreaking
I
story.
know. And as a big fan of Lois Lane, it's like that is now attached to the character for me, so I'm sorry if I've ruined it for anyone.
I was kind of hoping that he'd end up marrying the inspiration behind like Lana Lang or someone.
Yeah.
Oh,
Can
that
you like
was
spin some
brilliant.
fan fiction real quick?
He ends up marrying the inspiration behind the Ultra Humanite.
Oh yeah.
That's what we need. I'm just putting this out there now for the Superman Quest for a Good Game panel later.
Yeah.
I better see the Ultra Humanite part of that game.
Yeah.
As
the
protagonist.
Oh.
Yeah, as a love interest. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that the chat is currently just spamming F for Joe Shuster. Thank you, chat.
A little late, but you know what?
I'm sure you would appreciate the F in the chat. So just before we move on, I just want to acknowledge Adam Barber has just sent in an incredibly generous donation on Tiltify. He's just sent in a donation of $1,000.
Oh my god!
Oh my god!
That's
really?
incredible.
We should just give a.
I'm checking the Tiltify now.
Holy cow! Well,
thank you so much, Adam. That's
I want to see this with my own eyes.
That's incredible. What's the real world origin behind Adam? Is that his name?
Yeah. What's the real world origin behind such generosity?
That's the real question.
That's the question, Scott.
Behind the human spirit.
Honestly, thank you to everyone that's donated any amount of money, whether it's $1 upwards. It's all going to an incredible cause, and every bit helps. But honestly, Adam, if you're watching this,
Adam, if you're in the chat, what is your favorite superhero? We need to give you a moment.
The generosity is overwhelming in the best way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's amazing. This is
someone in the chat just put in, how do you donate?
So
someone in the chat just asked, how do you donate?
Yeah, so there should be a link in the description of all of the live streams to our Tiltify page. That is the best way to donate, and it's the way to get your names into the raffles for the giveaways we'll be doing at the end of every stream. Hopefully, some of our wonderful moderators will be posting the link through all the live chat, so just keep an eye out. It'll either be in the description or it'll be in the live chat.
Yeah, and just a reminder that the giveaways include I did get confirmation that it is a $50 Amazon.
Nice.
Yeah, I know, I got it wrong.
and then a 3-month subscription to Audible. But I think we're giving them away separately. So one person gets something, one person gets. So we have multiple winners. Yeah,
that's still either way. You're getting a pretty awesome gift.
You're getting a good deal. Getting a good gift. I love that.
You're certainly getting your money's worth, unless
you're helping out
Adam Barber. And that's it.
Yeah.
Like I said, every dollar we donate is going straight to charity, so it's much appreciated. Mm-hmm. Should we get back to talking about some superheroes, though? Does anyone have some more interesting stories they'd like to share?
Yeah. How are we doing on time? How are we doing on time?
We've got another half an hour.
Yeah.
Then let me just run you through the history of just Marvel Comics from start to finish.
You planning on taking up the entire half an hour?
Yeah. No, it should only take about 15 minutes. No. I would like to talk. My thing is I love supervillains. I think supervillains are just incredibly. They have some of the most fun kind of backstories behind them. So what I would like to do is talk about a villain named Brainiac. Have you heard of Brainiac?
I love Brainiac. Tell us about him.
Once or twice.
Once or twice.
He's popped up every so often.
Now, here's the thing about Brainiac, right? So his real-world origin involves one of the friendliest legal disputes in all of comic books. Comic books have a lot of legal disputes. Some of them are quite vicious. Some of them are very tear down the other person. This was quite friendly. This was quite you're encroaching on our space, but I'll help you out if you help me out, sort of thing. So let me tell you about it. So, you might recognize Brainiac as a kind of he's kind of in a robotic kind of cold android sort of a being. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, when he first started out, he was more so just he wasn't robotic at all. He was just a humanoid alien that was kind of a mad scientist, very smart, but misguided. Very. His name is Brainiac. It's a combination of brain and maniac. It's not that hard. you understand what his personality is. He's smart and he's kind of maniacal. He's a mad scientist sort of a thing. But they quickly had to change his personality to be a cold, robotic sort of a being because of this little legal dispute. So,
I don't know about this.
Join me, won't you, everyone?
Let's go down the rabbit hole together.
Into the distant future of the year 1946. The technological height of humankind. So, this year, 1946, the first general-purpose computer was announced, and it was called the ENIAC, which was an acronym that stood for Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer. So this computer, at the time, was faster than anything else available. And it could be programmed for a seemingly endless amount of tasks instead of just having one purpose, which probably doesn't seem that big of a deal right now, considering we're doing so many things right now from computers. We're streaming and we're video calling and I'm looking at my phone on a script. But at the time it was revolutionary. So it was the ENIAC name that likely inspired Edmund Berkeley and Oliver Garfield when they marketed a toy computer in 1955 called the Geniac, which was almost certainly an amalgam of Genius and ENIAC, although some sources claim it was something else. Doesn't matter. Garfield and Berkeley, unfortunately, the computer toy makers, unfortunately had a bit of a falling out and kind of went their separate ways. Garfield kept marketing the Geniac, whereas Berkeley produced his own nearly identical version in 1958 called the Brainiac.
That computer became self-aware, destroyed Krypton.
Yes, and it started going through space, shrinking cities, and collecting them. Some people collect baseball cards. He collects cities.
So that's where Detroit went.
That's where it went. We've been looking for it this whole time. We found it.
Detroit's gone. Manchester's gone.
It's all gone.
No,
give
him back, Brainiac.
That is not the end of the story. So we haven't even gotten to the comic part yet. So that's just a toy called Brainiac.
What was it, Scott?
No wonder he's depressed. He started off as a toy.
Yeah.
Just before we continue,
yeah.
What's the phrase? No content, only context.
That's exactly right,
Yeah.
Owen. No content, only context. So that's just the toy. That's the creation of the toy called the Brainiac. Now, that same year, 1958, was when DC Comics introduced Brainiac into Action Comics number 242. They had no idea that the Brainiac computer toy was even a thing. They just happened to come across the name because it's a smart person who's a mad scientist, a maniac. Brainiac. We get it. We know how this works. So it was just total coincidence that they had these same names, the toy and the comic book character. So now Berkeley, the creator of the Brainiac, never accused DC of stealing the name from him, but he was understandably a bit peeved by how it could interfere with his trademark. Thankfully, things never got heated. The two parties came to a compromise by altering the character of Brainiac, who again at the time was just a humanoid alien. And what they did instead, in Superman number 167 from 1964, Brainiac's entire personality was retconned. The character was changed to be a living computer in totality instead of an alien. With such a drastic shift to Brainiac, though, DC Comics wanted to be completely transparent about why they changed him so much to their readers who might have liked the humanoid alien Brainiac version. So they wrote in the letters page of that issue explaining how it was a remarkable coincidence that both DC and Berkeley had thought up the name Brainiac at that time. And I would love to read you a little excerpt from this letter that appeared in this issue from DC Comics explaining the real origin of Brainiac. Thank you. You didn't have to give me permission. I was going to do it anyway, but thank you. I appreciate that.
It seemed polite.
Yes, it was.
You are on a call with two Brits. Everything's going to be quite polite.
All right. So the letter reads like this. In difference to his Brainiac, he's talking about the DC Comics is talking about Berkeley's Brainiac computer toy. In difference to his Brainiac, which predates ours, with this issue of Superman, we are changing the characterization of our Brainiac so that the master villain will henceforth possess a computer personality. We are confident that our readers will approve of this transformation. It will make Brainiac a mightier adversary for the Man of Steel. Readers will be interested to learn that they can build their own Brainiac by purchasing one of Mr. Berkeley's computer kits and assembling the parts. Thousands of youngsters, as well as adults, have bought these kits and by following the simple directions have been able to construct homemade computers which can solve interesting problems of all kinds. Brainiac kits cost less than $20, which I haven't done the inflation for 1964. So they cost less than $20 and make an ideal educational hobby. So basically, the idea behind this was DC Comics would make Brainiac more like the toy of the same name so that hopefully it would boost the sales of that toy, and thus the deal would benefit both parties. They could keep Brainiac if they changed him to help Berkeley.
So what you're saying is essentially Brainiac is the original #Spawn.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's like the 1964 equivalent of introducing a video and then being like, Skillshare is an online learning tool.
That's exactly what it is. It is just, it's like, because they were just,
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
It really says a lot about DC that they were willing to even just give this thing a shout out of, hey, don't sue us. Here's the product.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder if it was also because, comics obviously throughout their history have been seen as like this very like child, like almost like rotting, not educational, they rot your mind sort of a thing. And so pitching this idea that our character is will now be based off of a real world educational toy that you can get for your kids and they can learn about interesting stuff would have probably propped them up a little bit as a see, comic books can help education, can help people learn, can help encourage these good, interesting habits and ideas. So it probably was beneficial for them in that regard as well.
Yeah, that's honestly like, because obviously like you're aware that Brainiac was once this green like humanoid alien person,
Yeah.
and then he became like a full-on cyborg. So it's really interesting to, because it's a character that I'm familiar with. It's not someone that I've gone and read a lot of the extensive real world backstory of. So that's really interesting. Which begs the question: which Brainiac is cooler?
Which Brainiac is cooler?
And I say unfortunately, I'm going to say the Silver Age humanoid, because he had like really cool little short shorts.
He did have those
Well,
good
that
short
is the
shorts.
deciding factor.
I'm wearing short shorts currently. It's just the camera doesn't.
Just leave. Some things must be left to the mind's eye.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That'll be on the After Dark.
Yeah. Well, because I do like the idea, because it does feel like the idea of like a cold, robotic, artificial intelligence is almost kind of played out a little bit. So like the idea that there's just a version of Brainiac where he's not a robot.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe I don't think it was necessarily played out in 1964.
No, I agree.
But by contemporary standards, I think the kind of more android Brainiac stands out a little bit less, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Because I do think that, especially with like a villain like Lex Luthor, who at the time was also this kind of maniacal super genius.
Was also a robot.
Right, yeah. Also artificial intelligence. Well, no, it's good to
100%.
differentiate the villains at that time, too. Because
Yeah.
then you have Lex Luthor, and then you have this other thing that's not like going to scream and shout and be like, curse you, Superman! But instead it's going to be very cold and unfeeling and just be like, I'm a robot, I'm going to do the robot things, and if that hurts people, oh well. And then
That's it. It's funny because both variations of Brainiac, they retain that idea of like, he's not necessarily evil, he's just so committed to this singular focus, and he doesn't necessarily consider the effects that his actions have. It's just, I preserve things, I collect things, that is what I do. Kind of.
Have you ever seen the Tim Burton redesign of him for the Superman Lives movie that was never made?
Oh, ages ago.
It's like, it's such...
I forgot what it looks like.
It's like a head in a jar and then spider legs right the way down. And it's amazing in just how mechanically cold it is.
Yeah, some of the concept art because obviously there's the really good documentary that John Schnepp did a number of years ago about that film.
Yeah.
And a load of the concept art of like Brainiac's ship and all of his technology. And it's almost like, it's like alien-esque. It's very like H.R. Geiger like inspired.
Very.
It's this really interesting mix between like cybernetics and like weird, almost like naturalistic. It's a really interesting like melting pot between the idea of him being flesh based and being like robotic based. Because even in the one that you're talking about where he's the head on the spider legs, I'm pretty sure the head is like the old Silver Age Brainiac.
It is. It's like an organic head that's being kept alive by the system.
So it's
also,
almost
shout
like
out to John Schnepp, who sadly passed away after making that documentary.
Right.
But it's still it's a really nice blend between the two like different styles. It's literally like throwing these two versions of Brainiac together. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
I think I'm going to vote for that being the best version.
Damn it.
Yeah.
Short, we'll have the day after all. So we've got 15 minutes left. Michaela, do you want to tell us a story?
Oh, yes. Oh, my gosh, I'm so sorry. I forgot about this.
I do, but Owen, you might have to help me out here since you're the history major.
No pressure.
Mostly because I know
made
nothing
sure that
about Thatcherism.
Oh, God. I'm not.
What are we diving into?
Right.
Someone help me out here.
Okay, now we sort of touched on it earlier when talking about the I can't even say the word, like the problems between companies.
Yeah.
I keep going to say distribution, but it's disputes between DC and a certain other company that was known as Fawcett. Now, they are the people who originally published Shazam They are the people who originally published Shazam / Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel has a very interesting history when it comes to here in England.
Yeah.
Because it spawned something that has now become very infamous But I think is also somewhat niche because the amount of people who have read stuff that is heavily inspired by it but don't seem to know it, I find quite
know
interesting.
the connections of it. Yeah. So
Exactly.
what's interesting about it is, as I touched on when we were talking about the Superman story, the Captain America story earlier, Captain Marvel was for a good number of years the most popular comic book in the UK. Like for like a 5-year period. Like Captain Marvel was everywhere over here. And so how in the States, when Superman first took off, you had a lot of copycat characters, which is where Captain Marvel came into. In turn, you had a lot of British comic book companies creating copycat characters of Captain Marvel.
But what's interesting is Captain Marvel itself was published by a company called L.J. Miller here in England. Now, the problem is that when DC sort of had their problems with Fawcett, obviously Fawcett had to stop publication.
Yeah.
So what does L.J. Miller do when they have nothing else to publish, but they seem to be making quite a lot of money? They ask a writer-artist named Mick Angelo to create another character, whose original name is Marvel Man. He had a lot of the same characteristics as Captain Marvel. You can see the name connection already. He had a family, small boy who could shout one word. Owen, what is that word?
Oh, what was it? It's something ridiculous.
Kimota, it's atomic backwards.
Yes, that's what it was. It was atomic backwards. It was so...
It's literally atomic backwards.
I wish
but
it was
spelled with a K, backwards. So it's Kimota.
I wish it was crumpets backwards. That would have been more on brand.
We're not saying crumpets backwards.
I'm not.
So anyway, Marvel Man goes on to be just as big a success over here. They had some spin-off stuff with like Kid Marvel Man and Young Marvel Man, which I always think is really confusing titling. But anyway, after a while, they stopped being published. And a certain other company by the name of Warrior gets a hold of it and asks a young Alan Moore to please revitalize this.
I should leave a disclaimer and say that if you are trying to imagine what young Alan Moore looks like,
he looks exactly the same, just with like a more thicker beard.
Yeah, just a little shorter.
Alan Moore is an ageless warrior.
Like instead of the beard being somewhat grey, it's now a little bit darker, maybe a bit black. But anyway, he starts off this series of basically revisiting the character now as a much older man who doesn't really remember his time as Marvel Man. I'm going to start calling him Miracle Man now just because it makes things easier to say out loud. But suddenly, during a nuclear riot, because these were written in the 70s in England, he remembers his words and says them, Kimota, and becomes Miracle Man once again.
Yeah.
Now, these become hugely successful to the point that they are now printed in America for Eclipse, where they have to change the name to Miracle Man because otherwise Marvel's going to sue somebody.
There's all the stories about when Marvel changed their name in the 60s, just buying every trademark that has the word Marvel under the sun.
It's like you could start saying Ma and the lawyers on your doorstep.
Stanley just comes in and just points at you.
Yeah, like you're just trying to address your neighbor named Marv, and there was like, that was close.
So, we can't even get Home Alone anymore.
Yeah, it's exactly right.
We can't even talk to Marv Wolfman without Marvel on our asses, but that might be a different matter altogether.
Wolfman. But yeah, so what's probably worth noting is that this was like how Alan Moore got his start in like mainstream comics. So he had grown up reading like the original Mick Angelo Marvel Man series. And so when he was tasked with essentially creating new original stories, this was like his big break into the comics world. And obviously, I think this was like 1982 he started writing Miracle Man.
I think it's slightly earlier than that.
It might be. But you got to remember, like, the idea of like golden age and like classic superheroes being kind of repurposed into these like real dark and gritty contexts that 80s comics are so familiar with. It's what Moore would go on to do in things like Watchmen years later, and what Frank Miller was doing. It's on reading back these early runs of Miracle Man. It's more like trialing this mixture of real world politics and almost like what's the word to describe it? He's forcing these larger than life cheery characters into such a morbid reality and trying to break them. And it's,
And what's incredibly interesting is that at the same time this is being published in Warrior, V for Vendetta is also being published in Warrior, because that was the first place it was being seen. So you're having more taking this very cynical look at the world, especially Thatcherism, through the lens of superheroes and vigilantes.
Yeah. And it's fascinating to me looking at it, because obviously Alan Moore is a notoriously political writer. Anyone that wrote Watchmen obviously has their finger on the pulse in terms of contemporary politics. But what I find really interesting about Miracle Man is both just the sheer weirdness of it, because at times it's a very strange and surreal book, but then also you're really seeing the staples of what would become Alan Moore's storytelling develop throughout his run. I think it's fascinating. And then it's also like, so it launched, it didn't even just launch one incredible creator, because obviously when Moore left the series, who did he handpick to replace him?
Neil Gaiman.
Exactly. So it's like this weird like reinvention of a knockoff Captain Marvel character. So it's a reboot of a knockoff somehow spawned not only like two of the most like well-known and notable comic book writers of like the last 30 years, but almost kind of like pioneered the idea of like the dark age of comics. Obviously like in the years after that, you had things like The Killing Joke, The Dark Knight Returns, Year One, Watchmen.
Yeah.
But so much of that is either directly inspired or written by the person that brought back Miracle Man and was trialing this new method of comic book storytelling. And I just think it's both the stories themselves, like the Miracle Man runs themselves, are really interesting.
Yes.
Then also like the amount of weird history behind the scenes with this character is just fascinating.
I mean, even if you go into the lawsuits of who even owns the character, eventually at some point Todd McFarlane comes into the picture.
Excuse me.
And it just becomes absolutely insane.
I do have to make a disclaimer that when we say Todd McFarlane, we do have to address him by his full title. Hi, I'm Todd McFarlane.
I refuse to. I'm not saying that every time I say Todd McFarlane. Sorry, Todd McFarlane, the creator of Spawn.
Hashtag Spawn.
Hashtag Spawn.
Hashtag Spawn.
Difference. No, that's just one of those examples of just the wild kind of happenstance and like the interwoven history behind so many different things. And it's just what makes this topic so fascinating to me, because comic book lore, comic book history in the comics themselves are very fantastic, right? There's a lot of, happenstance and things that happen that you'd be like, oh, that would never, that's too fantastic to ever exist. And then when you actually dive into the real world history, you're like, well, hold on. The fact that we are where we are right now is like almost exactly the same, give or take a couple radioactive spider bites.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's so interesting.
It's funny because obviously the real world history of comics is something that you and I have bonded over. That's kind of one of the things that led us to becoming friends, is that we both share this weird fascination for not just superheroes, but all the weird stories that lead to them existing. Yes. Me being a historian and also being a fan of comics, as much as I love the actual in the page adventures, the amount of just incredibly strange and surreal anecdotes that come behind the scenes of that is arguably, some of the stories are more fascinating than the ones that are printed on the page.
I was going to say that exact same thing. Like when you look into like how like these different creators did this and that led to this, and like just because of this thing and culture led to that. And it's like when you put all these pieces together and you learn why certain things happen on the pages, yeah, you're exactly right. Those stories of how it happened can be more interesting and more exciting and almost unbelievable as what's on the actual page. It's so good.
Yeah. So I just want to take a moment now to announce that we have our winners for our two giveaways. So I'm just going to read the two names off. Winners? First off, the $50 Amazon gift card has been won by Lewis Barnaby. So whether you're in one of the live chats or not, someone will get in touch with you and make sure you get your $50 Amazon gift card. Why don't you pick up some Miracle Man?
Yeah,
definitely.
Pick up some Miracle Man, pick up some Superman, pick up some socks, whatever it is you want.
Yeah.
$50 is yours. Thank you so much for helping us out. And the 3-month Audible subscription has gone to Spider Grr. That's Spider GRRR or Aaron. Again, if you're in one of the live chats or if you're not, someone will get in touch with you and make sure you get your prize. Thank you so much, both of you, for donating. And thank you for everyone else who has donated any amount of money today. Like I said, it's all going to
for donating.
Everyone. Every single penny is going to an incredible cause. We've got around 5 minutes left. So if you haven't donated and you're able to and you're more than willing to, again, there is a link to our Tiltify page in the description or in the live chats. Like I said, every little helps. And even though you might not have won in this panel, there are going to be more giveaways for every other panel we do today. And your names, and even if you donated in any of the previous ones and you didn't win, your names are still in the hat for any of the later ones. So there's still plenty of awesome things to be won.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. If you're watching this on like one of our specific channels, I know like I'm only streaming this panel to Nerdsync, but the entire at-home Comic-Con is being streamed to the YouTube channel, correct?
Yeah, that's it.
And yeah. So you can watch. There's more stuff coming up. There's a whole day worth of content that's going to be so good and so fun, and you got to check it out. I think I have links in the description of my thing.
There'll either be links in the description to the main channel, either to the YouTube or the Twitch channel, which will be hosting everything we post today, or I'm sure one of our wonderful moderators will be posting it. I will give you a quick rundown of what's coming up next.
Please do.
So this is finishing up at past, and then at 4:15 Eastern, it's going to be the Heroes Against Humanity panel, hosted by Comic Storian. It's going to be kind of like a Cards Against Humanity, Whose Line Is It Anyway kind of game show. I went and watched some of Benny's existing episodes of it, and I was laughing uncontrollably. It's described as a comedic game show testing the skills and superhero knowledges of guests. Honestly, I think everyone's going to have a blast with that. Mm-hmm. It's Benny, it's Aurum, it's Rick Nasdon, it's Sal from Comic Pop, and it's Dope Spill. And honestly, I think it's going to be one of the highlights of the entire day. So that will be starting at 4:15. So once this finishes, or 1:45, sorry, I've been awake for far too long today. That'll be starting 15 minutes after this ends. So make sure you are staying on the At Home Comic Con YouTube and Twitch channels so you don't miss any of the exciting things we have today.
Yes.
Given that we are kind of a few minutes before we need to finish, maybe take the chance to, Scott, if you want to tell any of our viewers across the various worlds that we are broadcasting to about any upcoming projects you might have that you might want people to keep an eye out for.
Oh, I'd love to. So once again, I'm Scott from Nerdsync, YouTube channel Nerdsync, NERDSYNC. And I have been away from YouTube just for a little bit because I'm just very busy working on other projects. But I am coming back with a force this month. One of my favorite things of all time to discuss and watch is Scooby-Doo, and I'm working on this very big, very massive history and critical analysis of Scooby-Doo. So if you like this kind of thing, learning the real-world origins, I've got a lot of real-world origins of Scooby-Doo in that, and we do a critical analysis of the entire franchise. That's coming up. I'm not permanently off YouTube. It just takes me a long time to make videos these days.
Hey, quality over quantity.
That's right.
I had the pleasure of reading your draft of the script for it, and as someone that has a passing interest in Scooby-Doo but a deep passion in history, I was just from reading it, I was absolutely entertained and enthralled. And
well, thank you.
I could visualize in my head it coming together in a way that only your videos can. So I'm very excited for that, and I hope everyone will go and check that out when it drops. Michaela, is there anything you want to plug? Obviously, you've got another panel coming up later today. Do you want to let people know about that?
I do. I will be on the Comics Academia panel straight after the next one. So I've lost all sense of time, over an hour and a half.
Yes, it's the one after the next
We'll
panel.
be talking, exactly. I'm losing, like Owen said, we've been awake for a long time. England is a very different time zone. So I will be talking about Superman, thanks to it being the 82nd anniversary. I'm a doctoral student in comics See, I can't speak. I'm a doctoral student in comics, so I'll be looking at narrative functions and closure. I'll be joined by comic tropes, the imaginary axis, and new comics. So that's going to be a load of fun.
That's going to be, honestly, that is maybe the one panel I'm jealous I'm not on, because
Same.
I'm also relieved I'm not on, because it's full of people that are much smarter than me.
Oh yeah, I would look so dumb with that.
Oh no, we're not.
But I'll stay here and talk about history, and then all of our brilliant people on the academia panel later can let us know about that. So before we go, we'll be finishing the stream in just a second. I just want to raise the fact that we've just passed $3,000. So again, thank you everyone, from the bottom of my heart and the hearts of everyone else involved with At Home Comic Con. Your generosity has been amazing.
God,
we are raising
$3,117. That is amazing.
Holy cow, you are
Incredible.
all amazing.
That is fantastic. Honestly, thank you all so much. In 15 minutes on the At Home Comic Con YouTube and Twitch channels, there will be Comic Storians Heroes Against Humanity panel. You won't want to miss it. So hopefully we'll see you all then. I'll see you all in the live chat.
Come check it out. Yeah, fantastic.